Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever it is, wherever you are, welcome to the Good Values podcast. Now, for this second season, it has been an amazing guest list, and this third episode is no exception. The first two episodes was a two-part conversation that I had with Jared Muralt, and this is also going to be a two-part episode. Now, this guest is someone who I've been a fan of for many years. I actually have one of his books right here, which is part of my background. And it is a phenomenal book. It's got amazing artwork all the way through. It's really interesting, and he's a very insightful and experienced person to discuss art with. So without further ado, this is my conversation with John Mahoney. Would you mind introducing yourself for the audience, please?
Sure, yeah, my name is John Mahoney, and I'm an illustrator, filmmaker here in Los Angeles. And yeah, I started working at Disney as a concept artist, and then moved on to the independent film world. So I've also worked at LucasFilm, Blizzard, things like that. But I've kind of remained kind of fiercely independent and have just been focused on my own projects. I guess I'm most known for my Zentropa art book. And right now we're launching a Zentropa kind of clothing wear. So it's all this crazy cool stuff that you might see in the book are on like bags and backpacks and pillows and that whole thing. I guess one other thing I wanted to mention is the Zentropa book, which has no story. If you guys have seen it, it's just stream of consciousness. It grew into a story, which grew into a screenplay, and we've been working on the film now for about 4.5 years. So it's going to transform into a live action film, all practical effects, 1970s style, and I'm knee deep into that right now. So anyways, that's it.
Absolutely fantastic. So with you, you mentioned that you are doing a Kickstarter at the moment, or is that yet to be launched? Have you already launched the Kickstarter?
It just launched like 2 or 3 days ago. Yeah, so we're just right in the middle of it.
And when's the deadline? Because I don't know. I usually record a few episodes ahead of time. So when's the best time for me to publish this? Is it as soon as possible?
Yeah, I would say as soon as possible. You know, we were able to reach our goal on the first day, which is amazing.
Oh, wow, that's fantastic.
We're really excited.
Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. So yeah, I mean, I
Okay.
think we can share the Instagram link and stuff like that.
Mm.
I'm going to do maybe a talk on how to do a successful Kickstarter and how to do an unsuccessful Kickstarter. I did the unsuccessful Kickstarter.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, we did good, but I think I made it too complicated. There's too much stuff. I got too excited. We've got 40 products. We should have one.
I see.
But you learn. We live and
Yeah.
learn as we go. And it's still going to be a wonderful advertisement for the store, which we're going to open up, long after the Kickstarter and stuff like that. So we're still excited. I'm still jazzed. I think it's some of the best stuff we've done. And what's exciting is when you do something that you're passionate about, one thing leads to another. I always tell it to my students. It could be a comic book, which leads to a TV show, or a painting that you do might lead to a series of murals that you do, and might open up a career. So anything that you can do that you're excited about, see where it goes. It'll probably go somewhere if you're excited.
Mm.
If you're not excited, it might lead to a lot of work and a lot of misery and a job that you don't like. So anyway.
A few years ago, I was on a live stream that you did, and you were doing fantastic talks about answering questions from the viewers at the time, the people who were on your live stream on Instagram. And it was things like, I was asking things like, how would you teach composition? What's a good way of learning composition? And you at the time had said great advice, and I did it since, which was, you said to watch a film like Ben-Hur and get the thumbnails of Ben-Hur, which are available online, and study those and do sketches of them to have an ingrained compositional template that you can build of sound composition. And you said that that film is a great example of something which is compositionally sound, and it is an epic film to watch as well, and it's very interesting composition. So I found that really helpful. Is that, you know, a kind of advice that you always give to people, is that kind of framework of study?
Well, yeah, study. If you look, see all the books, so I'm always studying artists. So yeah, that's the whole concept. Because I've been a teacher for 20 years, and the concept is learning rather than performing. So if you're studying someone that you admire, you're ingesting their ideas, their drawing methods, their stylistic compositional ideas, and then if you look at film. Uh, you don't necessarily always have to look at the best films out there. You can just look at something that emotionally moved you. For some reason, there's something inside your DNA that connected you to that film or that animation, and then you draw from that, and you find yourself more and more through these studies. So yeah, so I do that in my class. One of my favorite exercises is drawing from film, and it's funny. I think I'm more passionate about film than I am about art and drawing, which is kind of funny. So film class is always what I'm most excited about. And I always ask myself, not always, but I say to myself, well, maybe I should have gone to film school instead of art school,
Yeah.
But then I probably would say, yeah, but I wish I did drawing and sculpture, So you always want to do what you didn't do. So I'm kind of doubling down now and focusing on what I really am passionate about, which is live action film. Is what I've always been passionate about. I think when I was a little kid, I started drawing, while looking at Star Wars on my walls. I had Star Wars covering my walls, but I think I was in the back of my mind planning my worlds, my sci-fi worlds. I don't think I ever wanted to stop as a drawing. You know what I'm saying? I wanted to be an actor in a costume performing some type of a thing, So, but I think the drawing will lead to that. I could be wrong. I could never make a film. I could just be but I kind of doubled down, like I said, a few years ago, and I said I don't want illustrator it etched on my tombstone. I don't want sculptor etched on my tomb. I want filmmaker. Even if it's the worst filmmaker ever. Even if I have to etch it into the stone myself before I pass on. But really, I want to be remembered as a filmmaker. And we have a finite amount of time on this planet, and we have to make these decisions early. The problem with teaching and the problem with art is that I enjoyed it way too much. So what I needed to do was switch to do something that was extremely painful, which was writing a screenplay and having people read it and tell me how bad it is, and having to go back and back and back and back. So now that I've kind of come around and I'm really excited about the story and people seem to like it, and we storyboarded the whole film and da-da-da-da-da, it was worth the discomfort, I guess, So, yeah. So the one thing I always say, I'm talking too much, but I always tell my students, do what you're excited about, do what you love, up to a certain point. If you really want to do something else that you love even more, you may have to step back and go through some painful processes of, I'm an animator, but I want to be a clothing designer. And that's what I really want to do. And you may have to lose your footing and go down, down deep, and then kind of crawl back up on the other side and go for that other thing. So I guess that goes to anyone that's in the process of switching careers. It's people don't, they just say, no, you draw. You don't do the other stuff. So anyway, that's where I'm at now.
Well, your art style has a very distinct aesthetic to it, which I really love, as far as you have very interesting kind of foreshortening, like on most of your characters, where certain aspects of the anatomy will be enlarged. your knowledge of anatomy is obvious by looking at it, and yet it's not. It hasn't been. It's been stylized, and it's been kind of tweaked to a point where it is an artistic interpretation as opposed to a photorealistic rendering. So I wonder whether is your filmmaking going to reflect your art style in any way, or is it more the characters and the themes that you explored in your design and things like that?
Well, that's a great question. It started off a little bit more towards an aesthetic that you would expect from my drawing, but that didn't translate to live action. It looked ridiculous. Like hoses coming out of people's heads, and how could they walk carrying all this junk? So you have to, the story is number one. So you have to strip away whatever doesn't push the story forward. So I ended up hiring artists, really incredible artists that could deal with the reality of the world rather than my own weird point of view. But I do think my characters are there. I think that when people see the movie, it's like, oh yeah, that's Mahoney. But it's not like Star Wars on ice. It's not that,
Yeah,
and I don't like that type of stuff. Yeah, my favorite film was like Rocky. You know what I mean? It's like
yeah,
just normal
yeah, yeah, yeah.
underdog films. So, but that another thing too is it pushed me further. It's like, okay, you're doing this stuff, but does it work here?
Mm,
There's probably a little sparkle here and there of the absolute insanity.
mm,
But that's all you need. Like if you see a Hitchcock movie, it's pretty boring and normal, and then it'll hit you with something that'll just blow your mind.
yeah,
But if you try to blow their minds every 5 minutes, it just becomes this cacophony of sparkle and razzmatazz. We've seen
mm,
those movies, we know what they are. And it's just tiring. So you have to kind of lull the audience into a sense of normalcy,
mm,
and then you twist it so hard that they will never forget what they just witnessed.
mm,
So it's pacing based on story,
yeah,
so learning all of this stuff. I mean, I've always been studying it, but then putting it into practice has been literally the best time of my life,
well,
actually.
that's
Yeah.
fantastic. Well, I suppose I'd be curious to know. I learn more about film from watching films which do things poorly. When things are done really well, they're almost invisible. I never think about why did they put the camera there, because it's just part of the narrative. In bad filmmaking, I always notice the camera's in an unusual position and you can see something being teed up where you shouldn't really. And I
Right.
feel as though I learn from the mistakes. Do you have a similar process where you can learn from bad filmmaking of how things were mistranslated or miscommunicated, I should say? Or is it always trying to look at masterful works and trying to find how they achieve that? What's the best way?
Well, yeah, I think the poor filmmaking is more of a motivator. It's like, oh yeah, I could do that. I could do that better.
Mm,
But easier said than done, by the way. Just to get a film off the ground, kudos for everyone who's done that. But when you're looking at a master film or a film that you consider a masterpiece,
mm,
once you watch it 50 times, you know what I mean? Like I'll watch Titanic just for the composition, and I'll watch it again for the dialogue, and I'll watch it again for the color. Um, and you start to pick up on these things. The one problem I had with writing is I was terrified about exposition. Oh, if I talk too much, it's gonna sound corny.
yeah,
And then I would watch my favorite films with a notebook open, and there's tons of exposition at the beginning of the movie.
yeah,
Make sure you know what you're in for.
yeah,
I was watching the movie Aliens, and they give you everything in the first 20 minutes. You know exactly where you're going, right?
yeah,
As opposed to an art film where you're like, I don't know, it's kind of cool, but I don't know. That's the way my script started. People hated it. They want to know where they're going and why they're going there.
yeah,
The thing about the really good films is they sneak it in. You don't even notice. Like at the beginning of the Titanic, one guy explains to old Rose why the Titanic went down, and there's a little diagram of the thing going down. She didn't
yeah,
really need to see that. The
yeah, yeah.
audience needed to see that.
I see.
But at the end, you're not like, what the heck is going on?
Yeah,
You know? So I started looking at this stuff, and I'm like, I saw that a million times, but I didn't really realize how important it was.
Mm,
The entire film. So anyway, so I've been grafting that stuff into my film, and it's been, I don't want to say painful is the right word, but we've been storyboarding for 2.5 years.
yeah,
The entire film, thousands of storyboards,
it's
thousands.
incredible. Is that going to be a book as well in the future? Because storyboards are a fascinating document.
Yes, I definitely think it's going to be a book for sure. And what was I going to say? Yeah. So when I worked at Disney, we had story reels.
Mm,
We would just watch the rough storyboards of whatever movie we're working on. So I was used to seeing story reels.
mm,
So that's what we did. We made a story reel with voice, dialogue, sound effects, music, and we'd have people come over and we'd screen the movie. And then at the end, we'd have notes and stuff. And I wrote down every single note because every single person has something
yeah.
important to say, especially at this early stage. So I say those people were angels on my shoulders. And another thing too is like when I was early on in my career, or whatever you call it, I would do these really weird, funky drawings. And a friend of mine, my friend Ferris, said, "Why don't you make it into a picture? Why don't you just keep drawing and fill up like a rectangle, make it into a picture?" And I was like, "Oh, that sounds like a good idea."
Mm,
And that ended up being what I do. Just
yeah.
someone off the cuff said something, and I was like, "That's a great idea." And then it led to all this kind of like tapestry of stuff.
What's the genre of the film that you're making? It's sci-fi, but is it sci-fi action, sci-fi drama, sci-fi thriller, sci-fi horror? Is it how
I
do
would
you,
say sci-fi romance.
sci-fi romance,
Yeah,
really?
Beauty and the Beast in space.
Oh
Yeah,
wow.
yeah.
Oh,
So
that's
you can picture
interesting.
the beast I would I would design.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah. I love romance. So there's three romances in the movie. I can't just get one. Got to get three. Because I love romance. So
Yeah.
that's kind of like my some of my favorite film, Officer and a Gentleman. I love, and
Yeah.
some of these there's these certain films that I just adore. But having it in a sci-fi environment, I guess is also what I like. So it's great for everyone who wants to make a film. Just put all the stuff in that you like.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be 2 hours long. It could be a little cell phone movie that you shoot, but just shoot your stuff. Or if you do drawings, animate it a little bit, throw some music on, make a movie.
Yeah.
Pretty exciting.
It is. That is. That's fantastic. I mean, is that going to be, do you think that's a genre which you will continue to build on, or are you going to try to explore other avenues of filmmaking as well and, wander into horror or non-sci-fi areas, or do you think you're going to specialize in a specific genre? What do you think?
Well, I mean, this may sound weird, but I say this is my final project. Not that I plan on living long, but this is if this goes,
Hmm.
I'll easily be able to make a prequel and a sequel, and then offshoots, animation offshoots,
Oh, wow.
toys, products. So it's like this nucleus that would take me to the rest of my life. So,
Wow.
um, but yeah, if I was going to do something on the side, I'd love to do horror. I love
Hmm.
horror. I don't know if you've seen the movie Pearl.
I have.
It's
Yeah.
I love that. That's
Yeah.
that's my kind of horror. It's just
Yeah. I really enjoyed
beautiful,
it. Yeah.
wonderfully acted, unique.
Mm.
Something along those lines would be
Yeah.
amazing.
Excellent. Well, I was going to ask as well about your art making itself. I'm not sure when I look at your work what exactly I'm looking at as far as how you make it, which is really nice because I say this looks drawn, but it also looks like a collage, but it looks like it's got kind of computer rendered geometric shapes in there. I mean, what is your typical process for a piece? I know that it may vary and it may depend, but um, in one way, is it partly collage, or what is your process for building up images?
Uh, well, it's the process as has evolved. It started off with drawing, figure drawing, and I would just layer more and more figures and then
Mm,
create an image. And then I started getting involved with ZBrush. So I've been teaching ZBrush for about 10 years. And I remember one night I did a rendering, as we do, and I posted it, and someone said that was the worst thing they ever saw. And I remember thinking, they're probably right. But I got so angry, I started playing around with all these different renderings,
Yeah.
and I found an outline that looked kind of like my drawing. So I started doing a series of those kind of Mobius inspired
Mm.
ZBrush sculptures that are kind of collaged on top of one another.
Yeah.
And because of the process, it has to be such a high resolution. So you're just looking at this blurry composition. That's all you're seeing.
Mm.
And I was like, well, let me see what happens if I print it out. So I went to Staples and I printed it out. And I just started crying. I was like, holy crap. This is Mobius. This is line drawing. This does not look like ZBrush.
Yeah.
It looks like my drawing on steroids. So that was the original seed to start the hardcover Zentropa book. But there was some limitations. If you take a second look at the book, you won't see very many faces. You won't see, there's certain things that, hands, there's certain things that are in gesture. You won't see that in the book. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking line drawing and incorporating that into the ZBrush. So ZBrush, you might have a line drawing, ZBrush, like this weird sandwich.
Yeah.
Because I don't like drawing mechanical stuff, and I hate perspective. I don't believe in perspective. I don't think it exists.
Really?
But you can take in the digital world, you can create perspectives, forced perspective in that world. So I'm able to do the things I don't like to draw in ZBrush, the things I do love to draw in drawing, mix them together, and then the hub is Photoshop. Photoshop is where you kind of pull it all together. I can blur the image a little bit and add some film grain so it looks like an old 1970s comic book.
Yeah.
So there's these layers of influences that end up as the final thing.
Mm. Well, I have to ask you about the perspective, because that's very interesting to me, because I always, my philosophy is usually you learn the rules and then you break them, because if you don't know what rules there are being taught, you may break or abide by rules without knowing it and wonder why something's working or not, whereas you have the freedom to break rules at your will if you know the rules well enough. So perspective is one which I think people need to learn, because if they can't draw a chair, they're really going to avoid drawing a chair. And what would you say is your opinion on perspective? What is it you meant by you don't believe in it?
I think we all have our own chairs.
So come on, elaborate that. Yeah.
We all see the world differently.
Yeah.
When I walk around a chair, I'm also remembering what I saw from the front as I walk around to the back. So to draw it in perfect perspective is not how I see, and probably not how most people see. We see through impressionistic, almost like Picasso. Yeah. So if we were to integrate or introduce this idea that there is no such thing as perspective, whoa, what do you mean by that? What I mean by that was someone came up with that idea as a way of interpreting vision, but that's not the only way. And it doesn't really exist. We don't, the room doesn't get small. If it did, we'd be in big trouble. So it's a perception of eyes that only humans see. A cat does not think that the room is getting small when they look across, so it's only, and humans are only a small part of the entire population of the planet. So we as human beings, which is very small, is saying to everybody else, we're right and you're wrong. It's almost like the flat earth thing.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into that, but because I don't believe in flat earth, obviously. But I don't know. I think that perspective is humorous, and I like to jab people and get people angry about it. Yeah. I would like to make a book to prove, which would be easy, that there's no such thing as perspective. But the only reason I would do that book is to introduce the idea of space. So for instance, let's say you have a figure model on a model stand. They might feel 6 feet tall one day, but if they're really angry and they stamp up on the stand because they just got into a car crash, they're going to feel 10 feet tall. So you're going to draw them differently. Or
Mm.
they're very depressed, they might feel 3 feet tall.
Yeah.
So how does that doesn't make sense with perspective and measuring, but it makes sense about our emotional perception to what we see.
Mm.
So, you know, I think, but and more importantly than that is when you start tapping into that, you can start become more expressive. You can actually have more space in your artwork because you can exaggerate that space. Um, so yeah, if someone is a much more, let's say, scientific minded person, they would get very angry at this type of stuff. Um, but uh, and if that's the type of artwork that you want to do, then that's totally fine.
Mm.
I don't think learning it in order to learn how to draw is necessary. Just like you don't need to learn anatomy or any of that stuff.
Mm.
I think it's just we all have our own things that we need to learn because sometimes what those things can do is hold you back. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, I wish I was more creative. Let me study more perspective. It doesn't work. So I think choosing, and the one thing I always say too, and this again, obviously I'm very opinionated, um, is it's up to you. It's up to the individual. You can start completely abstract and wild and move towards realism, or
Mm.
start realism, go the other way, or start somewhere in the middle. As an artist, we can just plop in here and go where we want to go day by day, week by week, year by year. It's when we don't do that, we start getting into artist block. We start getting into, I wish I was as good as so and so. I'm not being myself as much as I should be. There's
Mm.
something missing. That's when those rules are interfering with our natural sense of the direction we need to go with our artwork. So I would never tell a student you have to distort or you have to do perspective. I was like, it's up to you. So I have the students bring in what I call an inspiration binder,
Mm.
where they gather artwork that they love, whatever it is. And then I try to encourage them to go there, wherever there is. So
Yeah.
if you have 20 students, it's 20 different directions,
Yeah.
you know? So it's celebrating what they are attracted to.
Um, what would you say is the most common, or one of the most common mistakes that students make you come across?
Uh, well, students, I can only talk about my own corner of the globe, which is drawing. The funny thing is, I don't think students make any mistakes. I think it's the teachers. You know what I'm saying? I think that what the teachers make mistakes about trying to teach. I don't want to get into trouble, but I think formulaic drawing can be a trap.
Mm.
Um, and I think thinking that there's a formula can be a trap. But I don't think students come up with that idea. We don't do that when we start as a kid. We just draw. We pick up a crayon and we draw. So somewhere along the line, someone taught them, no, you can't have fun, you have to do this. And then the students internalize that and they say, well, that's how you learn how to draw. And I'm like, okay, great, what did you do today? Oh, I watched HBO. Well, you didn't draw? No, I don't feel like it. So the I don't say it was a mistake, but I would say the one thing that might be hindering students is the fear of, oh, if I do this, if I do my own thing, I'm not going to get a job. People aren't going to like what I like, so I better blend in with with whatever's going on. Oh my God, if I don't blend in, I'm in big trouble.
Yeah.
So I think that would be the number one thing that I would encourage. And I do this almost subconsciously, but if I'm in a classroom, I always look around and see what everyone's doing and say, what can I do differently? It's just normal. I cannot blend in, you know. But we're all different. We shouldn't be blending in. There shouldn't be a whole group of artists all doing the same thing, right? It just
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. Another, I would say, mistake that teachers might make is they might think that someone in the room is not talented or they're not motivated. Well, I think that you can find the talent and you can find the motivation once you analyze what the student is really excited about. Like let's say you have the worst student ever. They just can't draw. They hate drawing and stuff like that. Well, maybe they're a talented writer. Maybe they came to this creative endeavor because they felt like they wanted to express themselves, but that's not their thing. So once you question them, oh, what do you like to do? And da 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 da. Next thing you know, they're excited. Imagine a figure drawing class where one student just writes paragraphs all day. That's successful if they're creating, Yeah, they're not drawing hands and feet and you know what I mean, but they're different from everybody else in the class. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Maybe we can draw based on their wonderful stories. So those are the type of things that I'm always looking for. And the one thing I was going to say too is once you follow your dreams and you just go in your own direction, it still can be hard. You can have tough days, maybe tough years. But I think the one thing I always lean on is the artists that I admire and the masters, So even though you might do the weirdest thing that you don't think anyone will ever like, as long as you also study the masters or the masters of film and drawing and stuff like that, and you're building on that foundation, you'll probably do great, It's hard if I'm just going to do my own thing and you live in a log cabin and you don't expose yourself to anything. You're not building, you're not learning, you're just simply doing. So on the one hand, learning from the best that you consider the best, and number two, following your own path should in theory lead to success. I feel right now I'm happier than I've ever been with my artwork and my choices and things like that. And I know quite a bit of people in the arts that are very jaded and been in the film business and been beaten up and dragged through the coals and are kind of a little bitter, to say the least. I'm more excited now than I've ever been, and I think making certain choices and sacrifices along the way, saying, well, I don't really want to do that, or if I go in that direction, it might lead me to being more bitter about this particular thing, so I'm just going to go over here and do my own thing, I've been to big companies like that I admire, like speaking to the CEO personally, and what do they say? The same thing. Yeah, but I wish I could do my own thing. Everybody says the same thing. But you own this company. Yeah, but I don't have time to do my own thing. I'm like, all right. So it makes me think, okay, if I go home right now and do my own thing, I'm more successful than that CEO. And then you think then the most successful people are the students who are able to do their own thing. Hopefully they're doing their own thing because they're doing what they really love and they're planting those seeds for being able to do their own thing after they graduate. So I always try to say to the students, embrace those times, but hopefully internalize them. So when you leave, let's say you work at a company, and let's say you're making good money, insurance, got a house, car, a nice dog, but you're still feeling unfulfilled. At least you have enough motivation to go home at night and work on that children's book that you always wanted to do. You're not so burnt out that you just hit the couch and veg, So building that mindset in school, that children's book that you work on at home at night could open up the world for you and make you the happiest person in the world. If you water that plant every day or every week. If you don't, and I said this to my friend yesterday, you can lose 20 years like that. Literally, you can wake up like, my God. I just get chills when I say that because it happened to me. You can lose 20 years in a blink of an eye. You have to really focus every day and say, what do I want to do? Write it on your wall, remind yourself. And even if it's just 5 minutes a day, if you don't do that, again, 20 years can just go by in a blink of an eye.
Do you set yourself work hours in order to make sure that you remain disciplined with your practice and work on these meticulous images? Do you set like hours where you're like, I want to be at my desk by 10 a.m. or, some kind of framework where you're getting work done?
I do have a to-do list that I set every day. So I have certain things that I plan on getting done, and I usually am able to hit that list, and so that's my to-do list. So I don't really need uh, a time frame because I can't sleep anyway because I have too many ideas, which is not good. I go to bed at midnight and I wake up 4 a.m.,
Wow.
which is terrible. It's not very healthy. So in fact, I had to take I had to take cough medicine last night to sleep so that I'd be
Wow.
awake for this this
Oh
interview.
no.
No, in a good way. But the one thing I would say, and this is something that I wish I had done when I was younger, is I did a to-do list. I do that every day. Wonderful. But now I have on my wall a to-do list for the next 3 years. I have a 3-year plan for this film,
Mhm.
and that's even better, So what I did is I took a calendar and I just put little Legos on the calendar, and I would slide the Legos across like a chess game, and this is like a 3-year calendar, and say, how can I get this film into theaters if I start now? How can I get into theater 3 years from now? What do I need to do? So I laid it all out. I need an agent. I need a manager. I need to shoot a proof of concept film. I need to hire actors and practice directing actors. But I need to do this now in order to be ready 3 years from now.
Mhm.
So you can all do that. You can put together a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan. I didn't do that when I was younger. I just generally wanted
Go
to be
with
a
the flow.
filmmaker. Yeah, generally, I got into Disney. That was great. And, it was like this real general thing. And I would study film every day.
Mm.
And I did films. But when the films were done, I just put it on my shelf. What I should have done is really drag that film around to the film festivals. But I always say, oh, but it's not good enough. And I just put it away. Or if I had a 3-year plan, I would say, no, you have to get it into X amount of festivals, good, bad, or whatever, in order for you to get a deal to maybe get some type of manager so you can start directing music videos or TV commercials or something like that. But I didn't think that far ahead. I didn't think that those 20 years would go by so quick. I was
Mm.
like, wait, I literally, you know what I mean? So and another thing too is I have this. I'm going to write a book, but this is the most important thing. People say there's 24 hours in a day, but you can actually expand time. If you could give yourself 3 more hours a day, oh yeah, then I could totally do my own stuff. Well, you can expand time. When you were a kid and you wanted to go home and at high school, whatever, you stare at the clock and there's 40 minutes left and it felt like 5 hours. You're
Yeah.
like, okay, I just got to get out of here, right? You basically expanded time, right? So you can do that when you keep note of exactly how long you do whatever you do during the day, and you can compress that and open up time to do your own stuff.
Mm.
So I would time myself, okay, it takes me 40 minutes to clean the house, but if I set a timer, I can do that in 20. And I did that. I would do that with the laundry. I would do that with shopping. I would do that with watching TV. And I shrunk all that down. I expanded time, including cutting down on sleep, but I expanded time. So not only was I able to put together a feature film, but do a new graphic novel, set up a fashion line, and also teach all these classes and still have time to go out with friends, restaurants, and have a good time. As long as you're aware of that time. You
Mm.
know, I cannot watch that series on HBO because that would, even though that's, so once you're aware of it, you're aware of every hour, every minute, every second,
Mm.
you can expand. I have a friend of mine, he's like, oh man, I've got a little kid and I'm working full time. I can't work on my book. And I was like, dude, I have this idea. I can show you how to expand time. And he's like, are you crazy? But then when you think about it, it's like, oh yeah, if I really am keeping track of every minute, sure. It's
Mm.
very, very few people that don't have any time at all. I mean, yes, you have crunch time, and you don't have any time at all. But no one's in crunch time for 10 years. You die. It's physically impossible. So anyway, I'll stop there. But I do think that we have all the time we have more time than we think we have. Is what I'm trying to
Yeah.
say.
Okay, so that is the part one of my conversation with John Mahoney. I found that really insightful and very inspiring. I thought some of the things that he brought up were unexpected, like the perspective idea, and I wish I would have probed a little bit further, but I feel like he wants to make his own video explaining that in more detail. So sometimes I'll ask a follow-up question, but I won't necessarily harass the person to try and get more elaboration where they may not offer it up willingly themselves. But he did talk about certain things as well, like stretching time, which I thought was another very interesting concept. And the second part of our conversation is no exception to that either. It's going to be up on Friday next week at 6 p.m. Please leave a like, comment down below, subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell. Check out the links in the description to support John's social media. He really is worth checking out, as you've seen from this episode. And check out next week's episode for the second part of my conversation with him, because there'll be lots more artwork and incredible insights into art making and his experiences. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you next time.